In this episode of the podcast, your normal host is your guest and your guest is your host. I reflect on my experience at the Brisbane Valley Rail Trail 200-mile ultra marathon. This was a huge challenge and it was a big success. I'm excited to share with you everything that happened across the 53 hours that I was out there running. I had never been that far before, so it was going to be a huge test going into it, and so I share all about my experience, not just during those 53 hours, but the lead up to the event as well. One thing that I did forget to mention in this conversation is there were hallucinations out there on the trail. That's one thing that a lot of ultramarathon runners say is during these big races, 200 miles plus, that's when you do start to hallucinate on the second and third evening. Well, I saw a bunny rabbit in the top of the trees and even a couch in the middle of the trails. Fair to say, I was thinking about laying on the couch towards the end of that race. I hope that you find this podcast insightful. I hope that you find it funny at times, and I just hope that you enjoy. Let's get stuck in. Welcome back to the first 42K podcast, and today it is Saturday, a week since my BVRT 200 miler. I wanted to do a whole podcast episode dedicated to this run because it was the furthest run that I've ever done, and it ended up being an amazing experience. I feel like I lived several lifetimes across those 53 hours, and I just can't wait to go into a lot of detail and share my experience with you. I want to firstly highlight my mate Jordan Chenery and his efforts with me out on that BVRT trail, Brisbane Valley Rail Trail. It was unreal to run with him for so long. We ran just over 200 kilometers together, and I think whilst we were hoping to run the entire 200 miles together, and I'll go more into that, it was special. You know, when do you get the opportunity to run with someone for so long? And so that was about 32 hours we spent next to each other. And I just think you learn a lot about someone in that amount of time. We were already really good friends, but no doubt we're a lot greater friends on the back of that. So big shout out to you, Jords. Alrighty, this experience. Now there's so much to talk about, and I just think I've grown so much on the back of it. But I've written a few things just so that it'll help assist me throughout this chat, just so I don't want to forget anything. But firstly, I want to also give a massive shout out to my support crew, because I think sometimes when we recap these sorts of things, we can get lost in just the enormity of the event, and we don't give thanks to the people who make it all possible. And every ultra runner knows that without a support crew, it's not possible to run 200 miles. So massive shout out to my support crew. So I've written everyone down. There was quite a few people, but to Jen, Danny, Cam, Elise, D, Giuseppe, Sloan, Cal, Ricky, Ursh, Jordan, Lucas, and Snowy, who crewed, provided gear or food or paced us. Thank you so much. So the event started last Thursday, 15th of June at 6 p.m. Well, it was actually 6:09 p.m. because the race directors were running a little bit late. I think I probably threw people off. It's funny, every other ultra runner had those clips where you attach the bib. I didn't have that. So then they had to run to the first aid kit, find a couple of safety pins for me to pin my race bib onto my shorts. So it's probably my fault why the race started late. But it started at 6:09 p.m. on Thursday, the 15th of June. And I finished running on Saturday at 11:30 p.m. So a whole 53 hours, 21 minutes and 37 seconds later. Now, given the race was so far, there were only 6 starters. And I have huge admiration and respect for every single runner who towed the start line. I think the courage and bravery that it takes to even show up and attempt to run 200 miles is extraordinary. So massive shout out to all of the other runners. There was an optional early start at 6 p.m, which 5 of us took, and we were all the first timers who just had never been that far before, and we didn't know how far we could go. But the main start of the race was at midnight, 6 hours later, and there was only one other runner called Jonah who took that. Jonah was incredible, and whilst her race didn't pan out how she would have hoped, I'm sure, being forced to DNF in the end with illness, Jonah actually saw Jordan and I for the first time at the halfway point at Yarraman, which meant that it took us 25 hours to get to that point, to 100 miles, and she got there within 19 hours, which is just extraordinary. So massive shout out to you, Jonah, and I hope that you are recovering well. Thank you for your inspiration out there on the course. So like my first solo podcast from Coburg 24-hour run, I wanted to break this podcast down into a few different segments. And firstly, I'm going to answer your questions. So like last time, I did an Instagram story. I put it up and said, ask me a question about BVRT, and was thrilled to see that there were so many questions that came in. So I thought we'll go straight to it and answer your questions. Then secondly, I'm going to talk more about how I prepared both mentally and physically for the event. And lastly, just more about the race in general. So diving into how exactly the support crew helped us, a deeper look into what I ate during the event, the weather we battled in, and so much more. So without further ado, let's get stuck into your questions. I have plenty of them written down. So the first one is actually not related to BVRT, but it's from Quinn, and he says, tips for running first half marathon. Now, I don't know where Quinn is at with his running, whether he's starting from brand new or whether he can run with a base of, say, 10 kilometers already. But what I do know is a lot of people, when they try and run a half marathon, they try and do it too quickly, which can then result in injury. So my biggest advice to you, Quinn, would be if you are just starting out with your running, give yourself 20 to 24 weeks, 5 to 6 months to go from zero to a half marathon. Now that may seem like a lot of time, but when you understand training principles like a 10% progressive overload, which means making the second week just 10% harder than week 1, the third week just 10% harder than week 2, the fourth week 10% harder than week 3, it allows your body to adapt incrementally. So we're not just all of a sudden going for a 7K run, then we're going out for a 21K run. When you do that, the risk of injury is sky high. So you want to increase training load, which is both volume and intensity, incrementally. And if you can do that, you will build a really nice foundation that will allow you to achieve that half marathon in that 20 to 24 weeks. Now, of course, there's other factors that go into it. It's not just running. Another thing that you want to focus on is variety. So variety with your running, doing different types of runs. So doing some easy recovery runs where you'll still get the cardiovascular benefits without it being so hard on the body and stressing the body. Then you want to have one weekly long run. And outside of that, you want to have one speed session per week. The speed sessions are a great way to improve your running efficiency, but it does take a lot out of the body. So therefore, just one speed session a week. Even if you started out with 3 runs, so you went the long run on the weekend, you had one speed session and you had an easy run, that would really set you up, and you could have strength training 1 to 2 times per week outside of that, giving yourself rest in between. So that would be how I would recommend that you approach training for your half marathon. Again, depending on where you're at, say you can already run 10 kilometers, then it will only be a 3-month build up, 12 weeks to go from 10K to 21K. But the training principles are still the same, having different types of running in there, definitely strength training to strengthen your bones, your tendons, and your muscles. I think a lot of the time people think just about their muscles when it comes to the gym, but it is also definitely bones and tendons as well. So probably the last thing I didn't talk about there is obviously nailing the basics. So nutrition and sleep, really prioritize that because that goes a long way. And a little bit of yoga and mobility will just help keep you moving nice and freely as well. So Quinn, I hope that those tips help. Chad says, who's going to carry the boats? I am. I'm going to carry the boats and the logs. For anyone who doesn't know, I have a tattoo that I got recently in Bali when I was over there for the Bali Hope Ultra, which is a boat on the inside of my left ankle and a log on the inside of my right ankle. So when I'm running, I'm reminding myself that I'm carrying the boats and logs. So massive David Goggins fan. If you don't know what the boats and logs are, definitely just chuck into YouTube David Goggins boats and logs. It's pretty funny. You'll see he yells it out when he's training. Rach says, did you have any sleep? I definitely did. I was really intrigued to see how this would actually play out, because I thought that Jordan and I would run to Yarraman at halfway and then have our first sleep. We thought we could run 100 miles and then have a sleep, but it didn't play out in that way. So we actually had our very first nap only about 9 hours into the run. We were 8 or 9 hours in. We're about 66 Ks in when we had a 15-minute nap. So I've written all of these down. We had 6 sleeps, or I had 6 sleeps across the 53 hours that totaled to 1 hour and 55 minutes. So I had a 15-minute sleep at the 66 kilometer mark, a 20-minute sleep at the 114 kilometer mark, 30 minutes at the 100 mile mark, another 10 minutes, 183 kilometers in, 30 minutes at 212 kilometers in, and then another 10 minutes at 263 kilometers in. So that was, I think so important to have those little micro naps. It definitely gave me the energy to continue running. And it was something where I thought, do I need to have sleep as many times? Because if I sleep a little bit less often, then obviously I can continue going. But I found that if I didn't have those little naps, then my pace would be completely different. So it was better for me to have those little naps, because on the other side of it, I'd be back to running at a decent pace. Decent for that length of runs, so maybe 6:30, 7:30 a K, versus being so fatigued and running 9:30, 10 minutes a kilometer. So they definitely helped, but I do think that I can make some little improvements on that, which I'll talk about later in the podcast. Coming back to your questions. So when are you doing a backyard ultra? Did you see the boys broke a new record? That was from Dale. I did. That was extraordinary. So if you weren't following the Dead Cow Gully Backyard Ultra that was just on, that is a 6.7K loop on the hour every hour. And there was a new record broken by Phil Gore, 102 laps, which is just mind-blowing. I can't wait to meet Phil Gore one day and congratulate him in person. Just huge. That's 684 kilometers. So over 400 miles. I feel silly talking about a 200-mile run when they just knocked over that on the same weekend. They actually started the run at 7 a.m. Saturday and finished Wednesday 1 p.m. So put that into perspective. But yes, I would love to do a backyard ultra. I don't know when that will be. Right now, my focus is all about the run around Australia. So March 10, it kicks off. I'm going to be leaving the MCG, running 14,000 kilometers around Australia and proudly supporting Make-A-Wish with a huge fundraising goal of $1.4 million. So I can't wait for it. It's been a 6-year goal of mine, and to have it actually be coming to fruition is really exciting. So years and years of hard work has led me to this point. So for the next 8 months, I'll be training for that, quite specific. But I do see Backyard Ultra as a part of my future in the ultra running space. And I'd like to say that I'd be quite strong at it, I feel, because I'm not very fast, but I do have a really good tank. I can go for a long time. So hopefully my strength, my endurance would hold up really well, and I could do quite well in that event. You just don't know till you give it a go. Vince says, which kilometers would you say were the hardest to get through? I'd say there's probably 2 points that were really, really tough. So coming into Yarraman, I was in a bit of a bad spot, let's say about 155 Ks in, and had 7 or 8 Ks to get to the turnaround point. So I'd already been running for around 24 hours. I was exhausted and I was feeling sick. And I think you know that fatigue's a part of these races, but when you're feeling physically sick, it's really challenging. I'd already thrown up once at the 52 kilometer mark, so hours prior. But then I was feeling crook again, but I couldn't throw up. So I'm just out there like, this sucks. It's cold. It's starting to get really cold. It's coming into night time and we're not even halfway. And it was very easy to overwhelm myself. All I had to do was think about, I've already run 150 kilometers and I've already been out here for 24 hours. And even when we double that time, I'm still going to be out here. So that was quite overwhelming whenever I thought too far ahead. And so I had to really break it down, which I will talk more about later. But to answer your question, Vince, definitely that point. Coming into Yarraman, feeling cold, feeling sick, get to the halfway mark, have something to eat, throw up, have a little sleep, come out of that nap just shaking and thinking, here we go again. We've got another 100 miles to go. So that was a very challenging point. And then at around just after the 200 kilometer mark is when Jord pulled out of the race. That was really challenging again because we'd been running together the whole time. And I think because we'd chatted a lot about this race, we wanted to do it step by step and finish strong. And then when he pulled out, it was like, okay, it's 2 a.m. now on the second night. So think if we started at 6 p.m. or 6:09 p.m. on the Thursday, it was around 2 a.m. on the Saturday morning. So I'd already been out there for 32 hours. Fatigue starts to kick in. And you're just thinking, okay, now I'm doing this, just me and a pacer. So thankfully, after around 100 kilometers, you're allowed pacers to be out there, which means people who weren't in the official race, but they're allowed to run next to you. So having pacers was a big, big help, and they form part of your support crew. I had a number of pacers along the way. I had Jordan, had Ricky, had Elise, had Cam. It was at Ursula. It was awesome to have so many pacers. But over that time, I think, 2 a.m. in the morning. It was also, I had just, as I said, gone past the 200 kilometer mark, which was the furthest point that I'd ever been before, back 8 weeks prior, the Coburg 24-hour run when I ran 201 Ks. So I think going into the deep unknown as well made it even more challenging, but they were probably the two hardest points to get through. How much did you walk? Alice said, that's a great question as well. We walked a lot. I think, as I said, it's so far that if you don't break it down, then 53 hours, or not even 53 hours, I didn't know it was going to take me 53 hours. 200 miles is going to overwhelm you. So what we did was we had a strategy where we would run for 12 minutes and we would walk for 3 minutes. And we held that for the first 12 or 13 hours. And then after that became too challenging, we went to run for 7 minutes, walk for 1 minute. And we held that for probably another 3 or 4 hours. So by that stage, we're around 16 hours into the run. And then from there, we just came up with 4 and 1 because that was like the same walk ratio in terms of 12, 3, 4 and 1. So what we did was we ran for 4 minutes, walked for 1 minute. By breaking it down that much, 4 minutes at a time really wasn't that big of a deal. So it was like, okay, just run for 4 minutes, then we'll get to walk. Run for 4 minutes, then we'll get to walk. We didn't do that from the 16-hour mark all the way through to the end, but we almost did. And so I think just having that structure really, really helped me, especially in the times where I was feeling sick or really fatigued and really struggling. So that was a great thing to have, a great tool to have at our disposal. But yeah, there were definitely times where we felt strong and we just said, well, why not keep running here? So we did put in sections of 20 minutes or so where we were running. Even right at the end, I got a bit of, I think, adrenaline come over me. And I finished the race so strong. The last 5 kilometers or so, I was in a bit of a tough spot mentally prior to that. And I put David Goggins in my ears, as I mentioned before, massive fan. And he talks about the cookie jar. And the cookie jar is a reminder. And it's basically where you think back to all the things that you've already achieved, all the challenges you've already overcome. And then you use that as a reminder when you're in a tough moment and your brain is spazzing out that, hey, you can get through this. So I was 318 kilometers in the race. I was just so fatigued and obviously feeling sick for a lot of the race. There was a lot of things like that. And I was struggling to get food down. And I was running at the time with Ursh and with Elise. And I said, I need to just listen to music right now, guys. I need to put something in my ears. And I didn't listen to music, but I listened to Goggins. And it was called The Interview on Spotify. Really, really cool. And he just talked about all of his different tools. And one of them was the cookie jar. And that's exactly what I needed in that moment because my brain was spazzing out. I was thinking, this is so hard. And often in those moments, all you want to do is quit. And I would never let myself quit. That was never an option that even entered my mind. But I was still a little bit sooky out there. I was still running over 10, 11 minutes a K, thinking this sucks, really finding it hard to enjoy it. And I knew that in that moment, I needed to remember why I was out there, focus on all the things that I love about ultra running. And by putting on the cookie jar, thinking back to the Cairns to Melbourne and that run, and then the 200 kilometer run at Coburg 24-hour, even the 50 and 50, the 50 marathons in 50 days that I did when I was 21 years old. All of these events, they compound. And so when you are in a really challenging period of time, you're in a challenging moment out there in an ultra, it's great to be able to think about those things. So that was huge. And I do put a lot of my success in ultra running down to the fact that we've had great mentors. And whilst I haven't met David Goggins, people like David Goggins, people like Samantha Gash, who have truly lit the path before us, and then we can follow in their footsteps and take on their advice, whether we've met them, like I'm friends with Sam, or I haven't met David Goggins, but hearing his teachings, I think it goes a long way. So massive shout out to those people. Anna says, you have your big charity run next year, but what motivates you with a run like this? Great question. Really good question. I think so many people were like, 200 miles? Are you kidding me? Why would you want to do that? Where's the fun in that? And for me, it was more about running with George. I think he's a great friend of mine. We wanted to run together, and that's why I wasn't so concerned on time. I just wanted to be out there running with him. But outside of running with George, I wanted to push my physical and mental limits to a place that I've never been before, so that next year when I am doing my run around Australia for Make-A-Wish, I can think back to that time when I did the BVRT 200 miler. And it's funny, I was talking to friends and family before the event even happened. They said, why would you want to run 200 miles? And I said, because I know that next year the run is going to test me every single day. If I'm trying to break the record on the fastest run around Australia and average 80 kilometers a day, I'm going to have testing times. So I'm going to want to think back like the cookie jar on all the things that I've already done. And I said, I want to think back about the time when I was 100 miles in and I felt awful, I felt sick, I felt tired, I thought I was done, and then I ran another 100 miles. And it's funny because I probably spoke that into existence. There was challenging moments all throughout the race, but that 100 mile mark was one of the hardest moments. So it was funny that was my answer leading into the race, and that was sort of what eventuated. Is it really was a struggle at the 100 mile mark, but I pushed on for another 100 miles. So next year, Anna, when I'm on the big run, I'll have the strength to be able to think back to the BVRT, and if I overcame that and I ran another 100 miles, then maybe I'm 50, 60 kilometers into that day, I can run another 20 or 30 and get through it. And that'll be huge. Just like I broke down this BVRT, I'm going to have to break down the run around Australia into every single day, one day at a time, and even less than that, 10 kilometers at a time. And if I'm really struggling, one step at a time. What run to break ratio worked best for you? I said that before. So I think starting with 12:3 was good, but ultimately 4 and 1 worked best. Emily says, how did you fuel for the run? Great question. And I've written a whole list of food and drinks because there's so much, and I hope I don't forget anything here. But over the run, I had pasta, I had vegan burritos, pizza, vegetable soup with bread, chocolate and strawberry milk, banana bread, watermelon, digestives, chocolate biscuits, bananas, peanut butter sandwiches. So there's a lot there. I also had some Sour Patch Kids little lollies as well. I know my man Justin Bieber eats those, so big fan. Big shout out to Biebs. Caffeine I had throughout the race as well was coffee, Panadol Extra, Coca-Cola, Morton caffeine gels, and Cliff caffeine blocks. So caffeine does play a big role in any endurance event, but I think when it's ultra endurance, like 200 miles, because caffeine helps mask fatigue. So it doesn't give you more energy per se, but it does help you feel a little bit less fatigued, or when you are fatigued, it masks it so you don't feel it as much. And I think that is really handy when you're out there for so long and you are into that sleep deprivation. But sometimes even after a lot of caffeine, we know that it can have an adverse effect, or it's just that it's not working too well. And so that was a big part of why Jord had to pull out of the race, unfortunately, just over 200 Ks in. Just sleep deprivation. It got to a dangerous point when he was falling over on the trail, slurring his words, and Cam, who was the pacer with me, and Jord, who was running next to myself. Obviously, we looked at Jord, Cam and I, and we said, you know, this is not safe right now, and the call had to be made for Jord to be pulled out of that race. But I really hope that we can do another 200 miler together in the future. And if not 200 miles, there's plenty more races to be done. I think that I would love to do some of the big races like UTMB, Western States, backyard ultras, like we mentioned before, maybe they're the sort of things that we can do together. So incredible to have someone as supportive of Jord in my corner. I think if you can find a friend who inspires you, who motivates you, who challenges you, who makes you better, that's a great person to have around. So again, shout out to Jord. Jake says, how'd you go with chafe? Chafe. I was good this race. I've had some horrible races in the past, in particular 2019 Bali Hope Ultra with chafe, but I've learned a lot. So I use Premax anti-friction balm. I felt that was really, really helpful. Loaded it up in all the areas you can imagine where you could possibly get chafing, and it was not a single issue. And I think that also comes to do with climate. It was warm during the day, but not crazy hot, sort of beautiful, 23, 24 degrees and sunny, freezing overnight. It was around 0 or maybe even in the negatives, I'm not sure, overnight. But I had a thermal on, fleece on, I had another hoodie, and then I had a puffer jacket. So I had a lot on, then I had my buff and I had a beanie. So overnight, each night it was freezing, but during the day, quite beautiful conditions, and chafe wasn't an issue. Quinn has asked another question. What watch do you have? So I use the Coros, just the Coros Pace. It's one of the base models. Felt it was really good. One of the other questions here is, how did your watch last so long? So these two sort of tie in together. It's basically every time I had a sleep, and I mentioned those 6 little sleeps that we did have, my crew would take my watch off me and they could charge it. So even though there was activity running, you could still charge the watch, which worked well. So that way, they were able to charge it when I was having a little nap, and that ensured that it was going to get there for the whole duration of the 200 miles, however long it took me to finish it off. Samuel says, how regularly are you getting health checkups with the sheer volume of ultra running? I try to get a blood test every 3 to 6 months, so I feel like that is working for me. I'm in really good health, and I think it's important to go and get your checks, absolutely. I probably made a mistake in not getting a checkup immediately after the Cairns to Melbourne run last year, and I had all my bloods taken before the run, but I didn't do that immediately after. So that's one little thing that I could have gotten better. But like anything, I'm not perfect. I'm continually learning how to become a better runner, better person, better coach. So that will be something that I would do next time. Test before the run around Australia and test immediately after. But yeah, to all ultra runners out there, definitely be having your health checks. I do work very closely with Yanni Griffiths as well from Eastern Health and Performance. He's my physio and strength and conditioning coach. So whilst I'm not seeing a GP very often, I think physio, strength and conditioning, always in really good hands. So working with health professionals goes a long way. There's only a few more questions. Reese says, how's the body now? Well, as I said, we're exactly 1 week since the run, and I can't believe it really. I'm so thrilled to share how well I've recovered. It's really polar opposite to the Coburg 24-hour run. So after the Coburg 24-hour run, you might have seen a photo of my foot. It was so inflamed, so swollen, and my whole body was just inflamed. It was... I had a calf niggle. I thought that I'd torn my calf, and maybe I did. It's just a grade 1 tear of my calf. But there was a lot of issues on the other side of Coburg. This time, no dramas whatsoever. So I put that down to a really good build leading into the race, which I'll talk more about soon, but also running at a little bit more of a conservative pace. So if you think about the fact that at the 163 kilometer mark, so halfway in Yarraman, that took us just over 25 hours to get there. Well, when I did the 24-hour run, I ran 201.6 kilometers in 24 hours. So that's running at a much faster pace. And obviously when we run faster, we put more stress through the body. So I think that running at more of a conservative pace so that I could make sure that I went the distance, that was a really big thing and a big reason why I've pulled up so well. So in the last week, so I finished Saturday night, 11:30 p.m. Sunday, I had a rest day and just laid by the beach, but also was smart with recovery. So outside of time on the beach on the Gold Coast, I went to P3 recovery with Jord. We spent some time in the sauna and some time in the magnesium pools. Then Monday, 30-minute walk. Tuesday, 20-minute easy run. Wednesday, 30-minute easy run. Thursday, just 15 minutes. Friday, yesterday was 1 hour easy, and this morning, 45 minutes. So just consistent, super low heart rate, zone 1 and 2 heart rate training, but ultimately allowing the body to recover through an active recovery. Mark says, where did you place in the race and how are you feeling now? Well, I sort of answered just how I'm feeling now, but I'm proud to share that I won the Coburg 24-hour, not the Coburg 24-hour run. I definitely didn't win that. That was Joe, who is my amazing coach now. I've started working with Joe 8 weeks ago. Ultra Joe Ward. If you're not following him, get on that. That was just what came to mind then. But I did not win the Coburg 24-hour run 8 weeks ago. But I did win the BVRT 200 miler. So proud to share that. I think the race, as I mentioned, only had 6 people in it. And for me, it was all about going the distance. I didn't know that I could win this race, but it's so far that it's hard for people to finish. So only 2 people finished the race. Massive shout out to Peter, who was the other finisher. I finished in 53 hours, Peter in 64 hours, and got it done. So thrilled to have won that race, but more importantly, just thrilled to have had the experience that I did, to have gone the distance and to have recovered so well. So as I mentioned, what that will give me next year from a mindset point of view is huge. And I had an awesome experience out there with Jordan and our support crew and pacers and everyone else on the course. Last question is, how did the other runners go? I sort of mentioned that there. There was only myself and Peter who finished, but all the other runners were incredible. I think everyone got to at least 100 miles in, which is huge. Most went on even to 200 Ks or 250 Ks. It really did depend. And also, I think one factor, I know I mentioned how important support crew are at the start, but Jordan and I had our own support crew together because the plan was to run together. So we had a massive support crew, which does help so much. I think when you go into these checkpoints, which is every 20 to 25 Ks apart, and we did stop at every single checkpoint, you want everything done for you, and that's what a really good support crew will do. They don't let you make decisions. It's like, here's food, eat it, and sit down, we're going to wrap you up in some warm gear. Whereas if other runners only had 1 or 2 other support crew members and we had a team of around 10 people, that's a big, big difference. So I don't take it lightly, the support crew that we had. I think it was a massive privilege and honor to have that level of care and support crew, and I do think that contributed to the result as well. So that's all the questions. Thanks so much to everyone who took the time to send them in. I wanted to talk a little bit about the mental and physical preparation as well. So how I prepared mentally, firstly, I want to talk about that because I think that is fascinating to a lot of people. When people think ultra running and people think 200 miles, they're more curious about the mind. Where did the mind go before the race? Where did the mind go during the race? Where did the mind go towards the end of the race? Then the body. I think you can train your body to a level that can handle the load, but mentally, where is it at? So I want to talk about how I prepared in the weeks leading up. So firstly, I stayed level-headed. I had a friend say to me a couple of weeks out from the race, are you excited? Are you pumped up? And I said, I'm level-headed. And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't want to tell myself that I'm too excited, because if I go out there thinking this is going to be fun every moment, then it's going to be a really rude wake-up call when it's not. So I think that was a smart approach. I, of course, had many moments that I loved out there, but there's also very tough moments. So I was realistic. I wasn't saying that I'm going to love every single minute. And so that way, when there were tough moments, I was prepared for them, which is sort of a nice segue to the visualization that I did leading into the run as well. So I think visualization is an incredible tool and something that I use in all of my races. And I visualize not only the good times, but also the bad times. So I visualized it being freezing cold. I'd heard from other runners who've done the BVRT in previous years that it is freezing out there. So I visualized how I was going to go in the cold in the middle of the night. I visualized a potential injury. Whilst I didn't want that and I didn't want to think that into my existence, I also wanted to know that if I've seen it in my mind, then if something like that happens out there, I'm ready for it. And so I visualized that. I also visualized the potential of Jordan and I splitting up, which happened as well, whether that was going to be him pushing too far ahead of me and me having to pull out of the race, or vice versa. And so anything that happened, I'd already seen in my mind before through the practice of visualization. I think that it does go a long way. I'm not a massive person to meditate. I mentioned that in the last solo podcast. I'd be lying if I said I do meditate, but I do go out and go for walks regularly, and even on my slow, easy runs, and I think about these things. So that was a really helpful tool. But just like I visualize things that may go wrong, one of the biggest visualizations that I did do was running back into Ipswich on what I knew would have been the Saturday or Sunday. So we left, as I said, 6:09 p.m. Thursday night. And when we were running out of Ipswich, I was already thinking about, okay, this is what it's going to look like when we run back in, because the course was an out and back. So I knew that, okay, if we're going out, this is what it's going to be like with 4K to go, 3K to go, 2K to go. And to try and remember that so that I can imagine myself running in and crossing the finish line. So that was really, really helpful, because when I was in those tough times across those 53 hours, I would just think, how sweet's it going to be at the very end? What if I can defy the odds? What if I can get this done? I'm feeling terrible here at the halfway point, but what if I can find a way? So that was really, really helpful. I think visualizing the good is really important as well. But I also reflected on the training that I did in the build-up, and this is probably the tool that I use the most in the lead-up to races. So I didn't just reflect on the 8 weeks leading into this race. So it was 8 weeks from the Coburg 24-hour run until this BVRT 200 miler, but I did reflect on the 5.5 years of training leading in, because I think that sometimes we can psych ourselves out if our short-term prep hasn't been great. And in my situation, I was actually a little bit run down leading into BVRT. I started to feel better only a day or two before. And I'll talk about why I think that happened, why I started to feel a little bit sick going into the race. But we can definitely get caught up in our short-term prep and forget about the fact that we've prepared for this for not only these 8 weeks, but for years and years and years. And so I knew that I was ready for it. I reflected on that Coburg race from 8 weeks prior and running 200Ks. I reflected on the Bali Hope Ultra, which was only 3 weeks prior, where I ran 106 kilometers as a support runner, helping all of the Bali Hope Ultra runners across the island of Bali, running up and back the 84-kilometer course and still getting to the other side on my own 2 feet. I reflected on a 38-kilometer run I did in training, a 33-kilometer run I did in training, another 3-hour run I did in training, and all of these things across that 8-week period building up, as well as I said, years of hard work. So that was really, really helpful. But I do want to share that the night before the race, I had a lot of self-doubt. And it's important to share this, because I think sometimes when you reach a certain level, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's running or a different field, people see your level of success and they think that, oh, they must not have any self-doubts. They just go and give it a go. And yes, I have a lot less self-doubts with running than other areas of my life. And I believe that is because I've worked so hard at it. And the more work you put into anything, the more your self-belief grows, the more your self-doubts get smaller and smaller. But 200 miles. So I was standing in the shower the night before the race, and it was probably only 24 hours out when I started to think, am I biting off more than I can chew here? Is this going to be possible for me? Can I actually run 200 miles? That is so far. And I started to have all of those sort of feelings of self-doubt and fear. But then I knew that I could snap out of that mindset. I just had to ask better questions. And so what I said to myself is, you were always slow. Even when you played footy, just Aussie rules for the Vermont Eagles, you were slow. You used to get run down holding the ball all the time, but you're an endurance beast. You can run long. You can run further than other people. And you could get to, even back then, the end of a game, feel like you've given your all, but you still had more energy to run further. And I know that whilst I'm not overly fast, I do have so much endurance because I didn't just reflect on those times playing footy, but the ability to run from Cairns to Melbourne, the Coburg 24-hour, and all of these things. So then I started saying to myself, well, what if 200 miles is actually your best distance at racing. Because up to 100 miles, it still takes, you have to be quite a fast runner to be able to win something like that. But I thought, what if I could be really, really strong in this 200-mile event? Because maybe I'm not that quick, but maybe over the space of 326 kilometers or thereabouts, what if my ability to just hold pace each kilometer is better than other people? What if I don't fatigue as quickly? What if I can go? And so they were the questions that I started to ask myself. And then I became excited. I became curious. And I thought, well, the only way that we will know is if I give it a go. So let's get back to feeling excited, back to feeling confident. And I really did remove those self-doubts. So I'm glad that that happened 24 hours out, not just I didn't have those feelings even an hour out. And it's funny, I was talking to Danny, who was one of our amazing support crew members before the race, and she's like, you seem a little bit too relaxed. And I think that by that point, I just come to peace with what we were about to do. So I was ready for it. So that's how I prepared for it on a mental level. I spoke a little bit already about how I prepared physically just by thinking back to the training that I'd done. But to share a little bit more about my training, so I was doing consistent 60 to 90 kilometer running weeks in the 8 weeks building up. So from the 8 weeks from Coburg 24 hour to BVRT, 60 to 90 kilometers a week, which isn't actually that much if you're going to go and run 200 miles. So I think that caught a lot of people by surprise that I wasn't doing these big Ks. But I worked closely with my coach, Joe Ward, who I started working with Joe, just after Coburg, because I connected with him at Coburg. He won the race. He seemed awesome. And I thought, I want to have a coach who I can trust to build me up for this run around Australia and all the events in between. So Joe had a big focus on the 80-20 rule, which was 80% of my training at a really easy intensity. So looking at zone 1 and 2 heart rate training, and 20% of my training where I'm really pushing my central nervous system. So that might have been through a speed work session, or it might have been through time in the gym. So there was a lot of rest in there. And I think even talking to Joe the other day after the race, he said that one of the things that it could have been is I went into the race and I just brought so much of my fatigue down. I went in really fresh. I went in rested, and that was a good thing. So outside of the running 60 to 90 kilometers a week, I was doing 1 to 2 lower body and core strength sessions and 1 to 2 upper body and core strength sessions. And I'd say that it always worked out to be 3 times in the gym each week. But sometimes I would do 1 lower, 1 upper, and 1 total body. So just a mix of upper and lower body together, which in the past I would have probably done a lot more leg weights. So I really do think that I went in fresh, as I said, and I just wasn't fatigued because my overall training load had gone down because we had to factor in the events being so close to each other, Coburg, and also running 106 Ks across Bali just 3 weeks before the race. On top of that, I did 1 yoga session per week. I'm a massive fan of yin yoga. I think it really does help give a little bit more freedom for the body. And when you've got tight joints, that's never a good thing. So really did help doing the yin yoga as well. And I think that if I can start to incorporate more yin yoga, I'll become a better runner again. So I want to talk about one of the mistakes that I made in training, because again, I think it's important to bring light to this. I'm not perfect. I think I'm always learning, and everyone should be having that attitude of I can get better the more I apply myself and the more I get around people who are knowledgeable in this space. So whilst I am a level 2 running coach myself, I got excited 12 days out from the race, and I did an hour in the altitude chamber doing treadmill sprints, ski erg efforts, and bike efforts. This was immediately after a 90-minute long run. So Coach Joe programmed me a 2.5 hour easy long run. And I did a 90-minute easy long run, so an hour and a half, straight into an hour of really intense training at Pulse 8. And I love it. It's so fun there. And I went there with my brother. So it was an opportunity to train with him. And that's why I did it. I think I was a little bit conflicted because my highest values are health and fitness and then family. And so it was an opportunity to see family, to see my brother who I hadn't seen for a few weeks, and to train at the same time. But I probably didn't understand, if I do push this hard 12 days out from the race, then how's that going to affect my recovery? And so ultimately, I then did start to feel run down on the back of that. And I think that that's because it was only 6 days after running 106 Ks across Bali. And also 3 days earlier, because I was in Bali, I wanted to experience it over there, have a bit of fun. I trained with the Bali Geckos footy team, which was incredible. If you love your footy and you're in Bali, go check it out on Wednesday night. I did that, but I think even just whilst we didn't do a lot, just the match sim of hard sprints and lateral movement 3 days after running 106 Ks across an island, a bit silly, and it did mean that I was a little bit fatigued and my body was run down. I started to feel a bit sniffly and a bit sick leading into the race. So I probably started to feel better 2-3 days out, but sometimes I think that forced rest is not a bad thing, and that's what happened with me. So forced rest going into the run actually probably wasn't the worst result considering how we did end up going out there. So here's a couple of ways I think that I can improve for next time. So I've written down less time at aid stations, especially on the way out. I mentioned briefly before that we did stop at every single aid station, and on the way out, because we were more conservative with pace, we spent a lot of time sitting down, eating pasta or a proper meal. And so I think next time, especially if I'm racing that distance, I want to eat more foods that I can have while on the move. So just walking, so it's easy to digest, but maybe just things like cheese toasties could have worked really, really well. So something to think about next time. Also, no 10 to 15 minute naps. And maybe this is just me. Everyone's different when it comes to, I guess, effectiveness from naps. But I think if we did 3 or 4 30-minute naps, so totaling an hour and a half or 2 hours, that would have been better than 6 naps, which totaled an hour and 55 minutes. Because we had 2 naps that were 10 minutes and 1 nap that was 15 minutes. And I think that I just didn't feel too good on the back of the 10 and 15 minute nap. I feel like we could have kept pushing on and then had a 30-minute nap, and that would have made a better, would have probably made a better difference going forward. So I spoke already about the strategy that we use, the 12-3, the 4-1. That was a great thing. Would definitely recommend that to someone else doing an ultra. Oh, I realized there was one question. I had a quick skim through these. There was one question I didn't answer, and this leads me to this. The question that they said was, would you recommend that course event for a first time 200 miler? I would. I definitely would. If you are at the level of running 200 miles, I think that that's firstly incredible. Congratulations. But secondly, there's not a lot of elevation in BVRT. And so I think because it's a bit flatter, it actually plays into your hands a little bit. It does depend if you're a mountain goat, if you spend heaps of time out in the mountains, or if you do a lot of road running like I had, for example. It was funny, even 130 kilometers into the run, we hit a bit of an uphill section and George just went for it. He's so strong on the hills versus I do a lot more flat running. And so I think that you need to choose a course to play into your hands a little bit more. But I do think if that's your first 200 miler, it's a great starting point. So definitely recommend that. I mentioned a little bit about the food and drinks that I ate on the course, but I want to talk a bit more about chocolate and strawberry milk. 5.5 years in now to my running career, and running's been such a big part of my life, just consistent week in, week out, year in, year out, and yet I still haven't found an electrolyte drink that works for me. And so I've tried Tailwind, I've tried just Hydrolyte, I've tried other different options. What do we have? We had Fix Nutrition, I think it was called, and it just still doesn't work for me. I'm yet to find an electrolyte powder that works for me. So I'm sure there will be one out there, but one thing that does work really, really well for me is chocolate and strawberry milk. And so across the 53 hours, I had 12 of those little 300 ml chocky and strawberry milks. I had Oak and I had Big M. So not sponsored by either of these. Don't even plan on being sponsored by either of these. But don't let anyone tell you that Oak is better than Big M. Big M's the GOAT. Loved it out there. Love both of them. But chocolate and strawberry milk, because they're high in calories, they are, I think each 300 ml drink had around 30 grams of carbohydrate, but it's also got proteins, it's also got fats, and it's also got some electrolytes in there. So it does hit your macronutrients. And I think when you struggle to eat, sometimes it can be hard to chew during an ultra. The ability to drink is really, really good. And if you can drink something that will also fill you up, game changer. So that really helped me. I wanted to spend a little bit more time on that. But also just want to mention, I think the importance of eating really good quality food, that goes a long way. Like in our day-to-day life, in the middle of an ultra, you have to nail your nutrition. So in Coburg 24-hour run, I think that was one of the things that I could have done better in my reflection on that race. Had a lot of sports food, even apple puree, that sort of thing, which usually I love, that sort of baby food. But out during this run, I struggled with any of that food, and I think because it was further again. So having the ability to eat really good food, which thankfully our support crew prepared, like vegetable soup with some sourdough bread, really nice pastas that we spoke about, and even the vegan burritos and banana bread that Lucas prepared for us. Awesome. So having good food goes a long way, not just in day-to-day life, but also in these events. I want to close out the podcast by chatting a little bit more about my support crew. So I did mention all the people who helped us, who are extraordinary, and I can't thank them enough. I mentioned how when you do something like this, it is really a team effort. People notice the runner at the front, but we have to give credit to our support crew because it doesn't happen without them. They're awake for the 53 hours as well. Yeah, they might have an hour nap here or there, but the time that I'm out there running, they are working hard in making sure that I'm going to be ready for the next checkpoint. So having them there, and as I mentioned, just the ability to not have to think when I got to an aid station. It was so well run and mostly led by Cam Munro. So big shout out to Cam, who's an extremely experienced ultra runner. Cam was someone who I met on my Cairns to Melbourne run. He's a police officer, and I was running through his town on the journey. And it was funny, he started to run with me, even in his cop uniform, which I thought was incredible. We just built a really good friendship, and he came down being an experienced ultra runner and really sort of took charge. We sort of thought of him, Jordan and I thought of him as like the captain of the support crew, because the other support crew had never done it before. So it was an opportunity for them to help out, but Cam to really lead and facilitate that. And just every little thing was thought of. So when I'd get to a checkpoint, and it might have been 4:30 in the morning, and I've been running now for 34 hours, and it's time for another quick nap, he would think, all right, we're going to nap at this point, because then as you wake up, you're going to be waking up with the sun as the sun starts to come up. So all those little things. And when I get into the checkpoint, it was an opportunity to eat some food first. He said eat, because then when you're having your little nap, you can start to digest that. Then when you wake up, smack a quick coffee, get your shoes on. They're tying your shoes for you. You're not even thinking about anything, and you're back running again. So having that level of care from the support crew goes a long way. And I think if you are looking at doing an ultra marathon, whether it be 100K, 100 miles, 200 miles, whatever it is, just really give thanks to your support crew because they do so much, and ask them to support you in ways that, you possibly didn't think that they could do as well. So big shout out to the team. I'd also like to thank everyone who sent messages of support throughout the run. Obviously couldn't get back to people during the run, and there was a few missed calls. Obviously couldn't answer the calls when I was out there, but I hope that following along on social media through the Instagram stories, it gave you some insights into what it was like when we were out there. And I did my best in getting back to every single person who sent us a message after the race. But if I did miss you, I just want to acknowledge that right now here on this podcast and say thank you for taking the time. I want to share that the feeling of deep peace on the other side of an ultra marathon is always worth it. It is hard to put into words. I think, again, something that Goggins talks about, the feeling of peace on the other side of suffering, it's like a world that people don't even know exists. And I think when you are so privileged that you can be in a position to run 200 miles because we're in the Western world where most of our basic needs are met, and we just don't need to be focusing on survival, but we can actually take the time to push our body and mind. That is a massive honor, a massive privilege, and something that I don't take lightly. So I want to highlight how it is a huge, huge honor to do these things. And I think 5.5 years of doing them, I love it more and more every single day. And I think that's what I put a lot of my success down to as an ultra runner as well. It's the ability to be surrounded by good people. I've mentioned Jord a lot through this podcast, and having them lift you as well. But also our first 42K community, being so inspired by them. And when I visit the Gold Coast, the Salt Social community as well, being inspired by them. So firstly, getting around inspiring community, that's an important thing. But secondly, I think, as I said, just years of work and loving the process. We need to love what we do. I put so much of my success down to the fact that I genuinely love running. I love what I do so much. And so it doesn't feel like a chore for me. Even in the middle of these ultras, when I'm facing tough times, I'm reflecting on how much I love it. And yes, it might be painful in the moment, but what an honor to be out there. So I wanted to say that it is an honor to push the physical and mental limits, and the feeling on the other side of suffering is unbelievable. But remember, above everything, your health is most important, because a healthy person has 100 wishes, but a sick person only has one. So always take care of your health, nail the basics, good nutrition, good sleep, and daily movement. And if you can do that, who knows what's possible. 5.5 years ago, when I ran my first marathon, I didn't think that I would ever run 200 miles. But you just fall in love with the process. And from that first marathon, I went to a 60K ultra, then an 84K ultra. And then I started to build belief, and my self-doubts got smaller and smaller and smaller. Until eventually, 5.5 years later, I ran 200 miles, and now I'm training to run around Australia. So I wanted to finish with that. I want to say thank you so much for you guys taking the time to either watch or listen to this podcast. It means so much, your support of me and your support of the First 42K podcast. If you have any questions with your own running and I can help you out, please send us a message. This is what I love to do. This is what I was born to do. I'm here to help and inspire other people to fall in love with running. So I want to leave it there. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time. We hope that you love the podcast, and if you did, please leave a review and share it with others. Did you know that you can train with us at First 42K for as little as $9.95 per week? If you're looking to fall in love with running and achieve your first 5K, 10K, half marathon or marathon, unlock your 1 week free trial at first42k.com.au. I'd like to thank our partners at HGG Performance for providing the podcast space. HGG Performance manufactures strength and rehabilitation equipment, which is hugely beneficial for runners looking to improve performance and prevent injury. Use the code FIRST42K for 10% off their products. Until next time, live happy and run strong.